Hello and welcome to the Nursing and Midwifery Health Program Victoria webinar to support your health and wellbeing. I'm Mark Aitken, the Deputy Director of the service, and it's my pleasure today to announce our guest, Dr. Rob Gordon. Rob's a clinical psychologist with decades of experience in stress and trauma management and disaster recovery. Rob was the Clinical Director of the Department of Human Services Critical Incident Stress Program for many years and is very experienced and well placed to talk to us today about the issues we're going to share with you. We welcome Rob back, as in 2020 he presented a webinar for us on managing our stress response and understanding trauma through COVID-19. And that webinar is available on our website. You can access that via www.nmhp.org.au and search webinars and you'll find it. In this webinar today, Rob will share his knowledge on managing continuing stress and preventing burnout. And this topic has never been more important to nurses and midwives after over 2 years in this very challenging pandemic. We're very pleased to present Rob, who's going to share his experience and wisdom with you. If you need support, NMHPV is only a phone call away, and you can contact us on 9415 7551, Monday to Friday, 8:30 till 5 p.m. Or if you need 24/7 support, nurse and midwife support is available, 1800 667 877. And you can contact that service, as I said, 24/7 whenever you need support. So thank you very much. I know that you'll benefit from this webinar today, and it's my pleasure to hand over to Rob.
Thanks very much, Mark. Hello, everyone. I've worked in and around hospitals for many years, as well as the other things I've done, and worked very closely with nurses, and have great respect for the dedication and unflinching work that they do. I want to share with you some of the things I've learned, particularly working in high stress, occupational stress settings. And the work I've done keeps bringing me back to the question, why do people do this work? What is it that keeps people engaged in such demanding work and getting such satisfaction from it? This leads me to some very broad ideas about why we work, and I want to take those through to the structure of our workplace to provide a background to think about how we understand the kind of stress that we're involved in at the moment in many areas of health and welfare and other areas. I want to start off with a diagram that I think illustrates what I like to call the dominant ideology of work in our Western society, which really says that there are kind of three concentric circles, three separate parts of ourselves. There's our work self, which is relatively superficial and defined by our work role and our occupational health and safety requirements, our contract, and all other paraphernalia that goes on with formal relationships of work. Somewhere in a deeper layer, we have a social self, which is the part of me that I engage in my relationships with other people, ranging from acquaintances and people I smile at work through to my nearest and dearest in my family and everything in between. And then somewhere inside of all that, according to this dominant work ideology of Western society. I've got my own unique personal self that is so vividly there all the time. And that these are three separate domains, and that actually they don't really need to get too mixed up, so that the work self is looked after at work, and we're getting better and better occupational health and safety programs, and we're trying to change the culture and so on and so forth. But that's defined by policies and so on. And, we're really finding, particularly the area of sexual assault and bullying and so on, we're finding actually these encroach, and they encroach right in here. That it's not really the way this is set up, that our workplace doesn't really need to worry too much about my inner personal self. Well, actually, I think that this is a major problem for us, in that I don't have an external self that I take to work. I have me. And so I've come to a different diagram, a diagram that really says that I have three different, and I apologize for the quality of this diagram, but three different, let's call them domains of myself. I do have my social self, and somewhere in the external part of that, I've got my social role of various sorts. I'm a psychologist, I'm a male, I'm a health worker, and so on. And this leads me to my self-representation, my idea of myself in these roles, which gives me my self-identity and comes right into this little germ in the middle, which is I, me. I find myself in my social relationships. In the same way, I have my work roles that tell me how I should work and what I should do. And this then gives me a sense of self, that I hold these values because they're part of me. And that then leads me to an identity, and that leads me to me, who I am. And finally, we have the personal self and so on. So that these, the whole notion of concentric circles of separate domains with something more intimately personal in the middle and more external on the outside doesn't describe the experience of work for most people. It might for some, but not for those people who work hard for long hours. It all comes from the core, from who I am and why I do this work and what it means to me. And so therefore, these are separate domains, so we can't get them mixed up. I can't look for my personal emotional satisfaction from my workplace. I've got to be content with what the workplace can offer me. And I can't treat my nearest and dearests in the same way as I treat my clients. That wouldn't work either. But I've put these little holes for a bit of exchange between these areas, little osmotic membrane that allow for some kind of controlled exchange, because I've got to put all this together as myself. I've got to link my work experiences to my personal self and to my social life, so that it suggests that there's a continuous interchange, but it's a lawful, organized, structured interchange. And I think this is something that we take for granted. We allow it to just happen and hope it works out without thinking about it. I'm going to say that the more we come under stress, the more we've got to think about this fundamental reality of our workplace. And if we say that my work role becomes a work self and a work identity that somehow comes out of who I am, because that's why I did it, then in order to be who I am, I'm going to need, amongst other things, a job that allows me to express who I am. And I'm sure many of you have, like me, worked for a time in a job that wasn't quite right for you. For a time, I was a teacher, and it wasn't bad. I think probably if I'd really had to, I could have made a career out of it, but I just didn't want to be putting stuff in. I wanted to be drawing stuff out of the children I worked with. And I realized I wanted to actually become a psychologist and do psychotherapy. want to draw out people's experience. That's who I am. And so I made that shift, and I was very happy to do so. So we have this sense of if you're not quite in the right area, and of course in nursing there's so many different fields, you work in one area and then you feel you want to do another, and then you find a niche, hopefully. So this really says, in order to be who I am, I need this structure. I need people that recognize me. I need to have a self-concept that allows me to be empowered, and I need a job that allows me to express myself. And I call that the work attachment. Apologies. The work attachment, that I have an attachment to my work because I need it to express who I am. The job allows me to extend myself into a place where I give expression to what's in me and in turn get satisfaction back. Now, this work attachment, I think, is as important as the other form of attachment that we are more familiar about, the attachment between a child and their caretakers and their parents, their family. That attachment, we know, is essential for the development of a healthy personality. Well, I would say we have to have a job that we attach to be a healthy, well-rounded adult, because it's that attachment that gives that magical ingredient between doing the job that my job description says versus really trying hard to do it as well as I can and getting great satisfaction from it. I'm not just doing it because I've been told what to do. I do it because I care about what I'm doing. Now, that's what connects me to my work. Now, if I'm connected to my work's going to come back and it's going to give me satisfaction and enjoyment. But if things don't go right, I'm going to get pain, stress, disappointment, anxiety, and all sorts of other things. Now, what is it that attaches me? Well, in many of the trainings I've done in occupational stress over many years, I've often asked people, why do they do the work they do? And we get past all the platitudes of, I've got to pay the rent. I say to them, surely there's an easier way to pay the rent. And they all laugh and say, yeah, there sure is. Then why do you really do it? And usually it comes back to fundamental motivating values, the way I was brought up, what's important to me. I want to give back to the community. I want to help others. Why? Well, that's who I am. That's what I was brought up as important. I enjoy the challenge. What kind of a challenge? To be able to actually solve a problem and help people. I want to test myself. These are very core values that I'm sure every nurse will relate to. They express fundamental features of who I am. So they go to the core of my personality. So it's the core values that actually sit behind my motivation to do the work well. And my role as a nurse, a psychologist, whatever it might be, could be a cleaner. I don't know, I remember once doing some debriefing with a pay clerk, and he said there've been staff cuts and he was incredibly stressed working weekends and 10 o'clock at night, because he said, I used to work in some other area and I thought, this is not really satisfying. I want to be able to do something to help the community. I'm not got skills to be a doctor or a nurse, but I can do the pays. So I come in to do the pays and I try to do them as well as I possibly can. So the nurses and doctors can forget about all that. They know their money will go in the bank without any question, and they can just do the work and help the patients. And so I'm helping the patients by doing this work. And that motivated him to be working weekends and very late because of all sorts of systemic problems. So we need to understand the power of that attachment. It motivates us, but it makes us vulnerable. And so we can ask, well, what really is the role? The role as a pay clerk, as a doctor, as a psychologist, as a nurse, as a midwife, It's a collection of knowledge, skills, training, practices, and procedures that we incorporate through our training and then adjust as we get to settle into the workplace. And it gives us the material that we can actually do our work with. It links us to each other with a sense of being in the same profession or being in part of a system. There's a whole organisation in a hospital around this that defines a profession. And the role is defined not by me, but by the community, by the society, by the hospital. We need a midwife to do this job. We need a nurse to do that job. Well, we don't need an ICU nurse. We've got plenty of them. We want someone in ED. I don't like ED. Well, that's what we need. Okay, gradually we'll find a place and so on. So it expresses, the role has built into it the organisation's priorities and policies. And that's where this occupational area becomes part of me. And I have to then find a way to express my professional values, knowledge, and my personal motivations within that. I don't want to do ED work. I want to work in the burns unit. Okay, when there's an opportunity, you can make the move and so on. Now, if we have that role clear in my mind and we're doing something, then we know that if we're doing it in our role, it's not my personal decision. It's what my role requires me to do. And once we have that sense that I'm doing what my role requires me to do, it depersonalizes. It's not something I'm doing to you, me, Rob, doing it to you, Bill, because I want to do it. It's what me, Rob, the nurse, is going to do to you, Bill, who's got an infection. And any other nurse who was on duty would do the same thing, more or less. So we all cop the same thing. Now, if he's angry and upset with me and I hurt him and I'm doing my role, I'm saying, I'm terribly sorry, this is going to be painful. Brackets, any other nurse would be just as painful as me. Some might be worse because I'm being as careful as I can. You know, I can depersonalize it. Not something Rob's doing to him, it's something that the nurse is doing to him. So in that sense, I think the role becomes a protective factor, and we all know what it's like to be able to make that shift from, I'm sorry I couldn't do that better, I did the best I could, that's what my role permitted me. Now, I see the role in that sense as like a skin, like a membrane, like a life support system, like a spacesuit or a diving suit in a hostile environment. The role protects us. And I'm going to emphasize this because one of the things I'm going to show you is the role is degraded by continuing unremitting stress. It's like wearing the knees out of your spacesuit. It wasn't designed to be crawling around on the moon looking for a lost spanner. They thought you'd be walking around upright, but you've dropped the spanner and you've got to find it, you know, or whatever. Look at it. It's got all this equipment here built in, and I've just put a few psychosocial role characteristics. I've done this for people working in disasters and emergencies, but you can see what I mean, that the role has built into it a whole series of skills and policies and procedures and knowledge and connections with other people, so you're not doing it on your own. Not doing it on your own, I say. Yeah, we hope. My goodness, is that the tether? He's about to step out. I hope he's got a tether to his mothership. And I think this sense of being tethered to the system, having a sense of that attachment, and that the system attaches back to you and takes care of you and values you. And the very organisation that's sponsoring this is, of course, evidence that in the bigger picture, the community does value you, and so they've set up a system to support your health. Fantastic. And that's got to be translated right down to the hospital, to the ward, to the nurse unit manager, to, you know, the shift leader and so on, in order to keep this functioning. Now, what I want to emphasize is that the maintenance of your engagement, your attachment, is really a fundamental thing to keep in mind. And you see this, this is a nurse stepping out of the changing room onto her shift here. It's a metaphor, you know, she's got all her gear on. Well, we've got that pretty literal, don't we, with the PPE gear that has to be donned. And in putting the PPE gear on, you're putting your role on. But now, how does the satisfaction come in? I think of it as a kind of very sensitive energy balance. The real source of energy is the meaning and satisfaction that plugs into my core values of what makes me as a human being feel worthwhile and valued. For that, I need feedback and communication that I am achieving what I'm here for. And I need a context of community value systems that then translate into a sense of social support. The value system means that the community does value the role I'm performing, that they value. I mean, some people will abuse and assault nursing staff, won't they, and midwives, and when things go wrong, or even when things don't go wrong. But it's so important that most people respect and value you. And this, within that sort of overall cloud of value from the community, we have this sense of social support, which I'm going to come back to a bit later, and the sense of identity of who I am, that's valued by my colleagues, by the people I work to, the managers and so on. And so we get this constant interchange that I'm doing difficult work together with other people who value me as a part of this whole team. And most importantly, we have to have a realistic adjustment of our hopes and possibilities of the outcomes. If you went into nursing with the strong conviction that you were going to save everyone you came across and keep them alive and make them happy, you were doomed to disappointment. So we have to have a realistic, that we're going to relieve suffering wherever we can, or whatever you might put it. Now, you probably thought about that when you were starting your role, and when you get deeply into it, you're not thinking about it. It's translated into a series of procedures. Now, this is where the whole issue about continuing stress comes in, continuing stress. Now, I talked last time about the way I understand continuing stress as opposed to acute stress, which is activated through adrenaline and a sense of immediate problem, which I must do something about or it'll get worse, and activates the sympathetic nervous system and explode into energy. Whereas the continuing stress is when my amygdala and my reptile brain identifies there's a big problem, there's nothing I can do about it today, I have to just keep plugging away. And that switches the switch in our system, and we have a different set of neurotransmitters and chemicals of whatever sort, which I just put under the heading of cortisol, which actually activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is about conserving, protecting, and containing my resources. And if I'm successful in continuing on, functional people actually maintain themselves in continuing stress. And they do this by making successful adjustments so that they normalize the pressure they're under. Where do they get that energy from? They get it from arousing their parasympathetic system and then focusing. Performance and outputs are maintained, but I'm outside my comfort zone in stress. How do I maintain that? I'll silence the feedback. I'm not going to think about how exhausted I am, how many sad things I'm seeing. And this then means if I've got to keep doing that, I'm actually creating a new baseline, a new homeostatic normality function. And I'm operating in, if you remember the graph I showed you last time of this bell curve. Instead of in the optimal stage of the bell curve, I'm down on the right-hand side, and that's my new normal. And I'm not working quite as effectively and efficiently, and I'm not enjoying it as much. But hell, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I've just got to keep going. So we normalize the new pressure. Now, what happens then is that's so important for me to maintain, because my self-esteem and my self-respect and all of my values say to me, you've got to keep going. You've got to show you can do this. The community needs you. You can't break down now. You'll leave your colleagues in the lurch. All of these motivations come that actually empower me to work in a new and continuing pressure situation. And now I've normalized this as my comfort mode, and my feedback systems maintain me in this state of heightened function. So the system is fundamentally out of balance. And so these adjustments are made at a cost. You can probably keep going with your core skills. Otherwise, you'd be seriously dysfunctional. And we don't let that happen. But the cost is that I lose leisure. I don't have the energy to enjoy myself. And these are a set of functions that deteriorate in this chronic stress. These are the functions that help us to integrate, process, digest our experience, and bring that precious return loop of value to give me the energy. Reflection, what I call mulling, is just turning things over in your mind, sort of linking them up, having associations, just being able to talk in a free way, putting things in context, connecting them up with your values and goals. I'm not having a satisfying day at work. I can't get anything done as well as I want. There's too much to do. But wait a second, we're in a pandemic and we are keeping people alive, or whatever it might be. Preserving that attachment and the sense of the future. These get compromised. Social relations get compromised. I'm tired and unemotional and grumpy. We live in that zombie mode. Now, in this zombie mode, when we lose this more complex processing of our experience, there are two things that are very clear. One is a sense of distortion of time. Oh my God, if I've been doing this for weeks, it feels like I've been doing it for 100 years. And oh my God, is it June already? It just seemed to be February last week. I've lost this sense of time. You get this distortion. And what goes with it is memory loss. I can't remember what I did yesterday. I know what I have to do today, but I can't think beyond it. I can't remember what I did on the weekend. I'm going up to the bedroom to get something. I can't remember what it is. I'm looking for my glasses and they're on my head. All of this sort of thing. These are very strong, they're trivial problems, but they are strong indicators of the compromise of our function. And this leads to a sense of I'm not really connecting everything up with who I am. And this is going to lead to a sort of degraded sense of identity. And that's shown by the feeling, who's running this life? I chose to be a nurse and now I haven't had a chance to even think about whether I'm enjoying it. I just can't stop. And so this collapse of the narrative of my life, of where I'm going. And another thing I want to mention is that I notice that when you're in that state, you remember all the things that are disturbing, sad, annoying, worrying, frustrating, anxiety producing. They go into, I call it a high arousal loop in my mind, where I'll actually keep ruminating on them. And typically what happens is that you have another loop, which is the low arousal loop for processing successful outcomes. And I've noticed working with nurses, if they have a very sick, dangerously ill person that they're not actually achieving what they want with, they don't think about, well, this is one patient we're not doing that well with, but we're actually doing pretty well for a whole lot. In fact, what they easily get to is a feeling of, I'm failing. I'm not very good at this job. It's like the high arousal loop dominates, and you've got to have a conversation with them and say, how are you going with your other clients, with your other patients? And start to put that context together and saying, oh, this one they're not doing too well with, but most of them are doing well. Well, let's have a think about why that is. And maybe you can't always achieve everything you want. And so as we go through, we see that this starts to impact on the attachment. Being in this state, our sense of commitment and loyalty gets stressed. And that's part of our self-esteem and our attachment. Now, we don't feel good if we're not able to work at the quality we want. Work attachment entails responsibility. And that sense of responsibility is either hard to maintain or hard to define in situations of great stress. We usually want to do a lot more than we can. And the organisation is a part of our identity. And often when stress is so difficult and everyone up and down the line is stressed, it degrades, and we get this element of cynicism, and everyone starts to move into a more egocentric frame of mind, trying to protect themselves. We become very vulnerable to these emotions of guilt, shame, anger, and so on. And we then begin to personalize what should be complex and impersonal and related to roles. And it's very important that we remember that we distribute the full responsibility here and not take on more than we need to. Stress has the effect, when it's unremitting, of pushing us out of our professional role into our personal space. We start to take things very personally. We start to feel, it's like the spacesuit comes unzipped and the cosmic rays start to get through and cause a bit of burning instead of being protected. And our role functions degrade. This is often shown by people cutting corners. Cutting corners, what are the first ones you cut? Your own occupational health and safety corners. You stop looking after yourself because you haven't got the energy, and put that energy out there into the patients. And a difficulty distinguishing myself from my role, so taking it personally, maintaining the quality of the role. And we often have to keep redefining our role. What can I do under this stress? And have I got an environment where we can make adjustment to role expectations and so on, as it becomes evident that it's impossible to keep things going in the ideal way. And often political imperatives collide with this. And one of the major problems is role conflict. I've got not enough time and I'm supposed to do all these things. Which ones will I do? And will my managers understand what I've not done? And so on. These are very stressful experiences, but they go to whether I think I'm a good nurse or not. Remember, the role supports our identity. So we need to make great care in taking in how we manage identity messages. You're a nurse, you're doing a good job, we value you. You're a midwife, you're doing great work. Our role needs to be maintained by the organisation. It's like our spacesuit needs to be pumped up with air when we go outside, and we need that pump up. And often when the whole system is under pressure, that starts to fail. How do we manage the stress? I think one of the important things is to challenge the apparent priorities. The apparent, what seems to be the important thing. And we've got to preserve that thinking that gets lost in the zombie mode, that creative lateral thinking, juggling lots of priorities and work out which one's the most important. Another thing that I notice happens in continuing stress is emotional contagion. Everyone's highly aroused. Some are angry, some are anxious, some are tired, and grumpy and so on. And so it's very easy for emotions to bounce off each other. Emotional contagion. We know about COVID contagion, and we're so careful, aren't we, to keep it sealed and not carry it from one place to another. We need to have the same kind of hygiene for our emotions. We need to respond to the symptoms of stress. I'm not hungry, I'm not eating. Don't do that for very long. I'm not sleeping. Don't do that for very long. Do something about it. And as a very simple strategy, I think it's helpful to say, when you're in this state, reduce stressors wherever you can. You can't reduce your stressors at work, but have a look at your home life and look at what's stressful there and see if you can make adjustments. This year's not the year to renovate your bathroom, even if you really had your heart set on it. Not this year. Put it off, and you'll do a better job. And enhance relaxors. Relaxors is just my word for the opposite to stressors. Things that will give you energy and enjoyment and so on. Really start building more of them in more frequently, even if just a little bit. Because what I notice is that it's quality which is more important than quantity. You know, if the best you can do is a 5-minute walk in the garden before you go to work, make a routine of it. If that's all you feel up to, do it. That'll be hugely different than if you just bundled straight out the door into the car and off to work. And I bet if you actually make a routine of 5 minutes in the garden, if you like being in the garden, you don't just look at all the weeds you should pull out, but you listen to the birds and look at the sky. You don't need much sky to look at. You need one tree to look at. You'll probably enjoy it. You'll probably actually find yourself using 10 minutes a little bit later. And just this idea that you're actually attuning yourself to a marathon. We know the people that win the marathon are not the ones that win in the beginning or halfway through or even 3/4 of the way through. It's the ones who can maintain the same speed throughout. They gradually run them down. They don't start off as fast, but they just keep going and they get through and win it. Now, I want to link this to the idea of support. I've listened to many people tell me that they didn't get support. And I've asked myself over the years in many situations, what do they mean? Now, support, I reckon, comes from a sense of identification with others that allows me enough depersonalization to feel that my problem is not carried alone. Let's translate that into English. Identification is that mechanism where I recognize in somebody else something that's the same as me. You're a nurse, I'm a nurse. You have terrible days, I have terrible days. We are good nurses, but we have terrible days, and we sometimes want to go away and grow roses. I can identify with you. Now, once I identify with you, I say this is not my own personal weakness. This is what nursing in a pandemic does to you. Can you see I've depersonalized? I no longer hold responsibility that I'm failing those deep motivations that set up my attachment. And I've now recognized this is something that happens to us nurses when we're in a really tough space. That's depersonalizing. It's not me, it's my role in the situation. Now, that comes out as a result of communication. I only find out that the other person is carrying the same quality, the same experience as me when they reveal it through communication. Or they ask me questions and I tell them, and we have a communicational exchange that say, hey, we're the same. Wherever we can find a similarity, we will feel a connection. The difference will set us apart, and that's important too, but the similarities. So therefore, support is generated by a certain quality of communication. And it's exactly that quality of communication that is lost in highly stressed environments. Going back to that earlier slide, you've got access to the slides after this, where we looked at all those qualities of mulling, of associations, of reflection, where we can actually have the conversations that aren't required by the operational tasks of the work, but are reflective about the experience of the work. That's where we start to realize that we're in the same boat. We depersonalize it, we don't carry it ourselves. What's the recipe for support? We have to be able to identify with others in the support system. Who's the support system? Well, it's our colleagues maybe, or our other staff member, or other people in other hospitals. And in order to identify, we've been able to designate the common elements that we need support about. So we've got to be able to feel confident enough to communicate what I'm feeling vulnerable about. So I need communication channels, confident, private, non-judgmental communication channels within my support group in order for support to happen. I only need one judgmental comment and I'm going to shut down, I'm not going to talk about it. We need to define the boundaries of the support group. Who am I going to choose for my supporters? Who can I trust? Who's in the same position? Who understands me? And here's the two really important principles I came to in my years of working with the Department of Human Services about all sorts of large and small incidents. I need support to be provided throughout the system. If there's one person who thinks I'm a weakling, I should just stop complaining, get over it, I'm not going to talk to anyone probably. So we need to create this atmosphere, this ethos, this culture of mutual support and recognition. We're all going to be affected in different ways. Don't judge. In stress, we judge. Don't judge each other. Everyone's doing it their own way. Let's just support each other with what we've got in common. And finally, we need support from all the levels to whom we're accountable. Now, who are we accountable? Right up to the CEO, right up to the Minister of Health. We need this flowing down. In the limited experience I've had, it seems that there is a very strong commitment coming down the line to support the staff. And I think this is so important. The higher you get up, the more symbolic the message needs to be. The lower down, the closer it is, the more material it is. Now, I'm just going to flash this up. I'm not going to go through it all, but I've worked out and draws on some literature and research in the area, but I'm just going to say I think there are a number of qualities that are helpful in promoting support. And they have to do with the way we communicate. Communicate to understand, give meaning, to organise, to encourage new experiences to be revealed, to describe emotions in language rather than just catharsis or just let fly. And, we might let fly, but then we've got to think about, why am I feeling this? Where's this coming from? Empathy versus sympathy, generating positive emotions out of it rather than just ruminating over the negative emotions. Focusing on some things, aiding control and so on, as opposed to just reassuring platitudes. Oh, you poor dear, that's terrible, isn't it? Oh, they should do something about it. Why don't they double the nursing numbers in the hospitals? This doesn't really help us at all. So these are guidelines about how we can have a supportive conversation. And in the last few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about resilience. I spent half a day looking up dictionaries to find out what on earth this word meant a few years ago. And eventually, following it into Latin dictionaries, I traced it back to the word sale, if that's how you pronounce it in Latin, which means reeds. Re means again, and sale means reeds. The resile, which is the Latin root of resilience, really literally means to spring back. But sile seems connected with sale, which means reeds. And of course, that's what reeds do. Look at them. The flood's been passed, it's flattened them, they'll spring back. The oak trees won't, they'll be swept out to sea. What enables the reeds to spring back? They're capable of flexing and deforming and bending and allowing the threat to pass without losing core structural properties. They lose their leaves or, they're a lot of stuff, but the core is there and they can come back and regenerate. So what's essential is these things about quality and meaning and relationships, all the things that we can't replace. And I think the science of resilience is actually helping us to define more clearly what are the things that contribute to people being able to flex and deform and let things go over and then come back afterwards. And in chronic stress, we must develop an art form of resilience. So these are some of the things, and I won't go through them all, but leave you to read them later, that have been identified as qualities of resilient people. A moral compass, I know what's important. I know what holds my self-respect and self-esteem. I know what I must get right and what I can leave. Being flexible, being able to generate positive emotions and optimism. How do we do that? Well, we'll be positive if we actually enjoy interacting with our colleagues, won't we? So taking care to generate positive interactions with each other, managing negative emotions and focusing on problems and resolving them, misunderstandings or whatever. Anything that enhances my sense of self, which I'm going to get from other people. And resilient people ask for and use support, and they use it early. Studies of resilient people who in the military in the US who move around the country, as soon as they arrive, the new place, they suss out who's a good person here, who can I actually expect to be constructive, and they set out and start making relationships with them, and they offer them help and ask help. In this exchange builds up networks, and these people have often got networks throughout the US because wherever they go, they make friends and they hang on to them because they put time and energy into them. Preserving our sense of continuity, not focusing on the regrets, but on what you've learned from it, accepting what you've lost and learning from it. Again, I'm not going to go through this. I'm just putting this in for a set of resources, but I identified in relation to other stressful situations a set of resilience features compared with, I made up the word desilience, things that will make us less resilient, less capable. And they're actually, it's very good to put aside problems to deal with later versus shut them down and put them in my mind. That'll lead to health problems. Just passively wanting things to be different and not being able to accept them versus, okay, this is what I've got, I better try and cope with it and so on. Constructive mulling, turning over as opposed to ruminating. Ruminating is just going over and over the problem. Mulling is just wondering what you can do about it and thinking about other things and coming back and so on. We can identify some resilience processes. And these, again, are things that come from my work with people in stressful work situation, flexibility of work schedules that actually recognize the worker's state. The worker's got to put their hand up there, but hopefully the system actually says we've got a whole group of staff been working their guts out for 2 years. Now flexibility means I've got to be honest enough to say, look, I really am sorry about this, but I'm really going to need a day off today because, brackets, if I don't take it off today, I might take a month off in a few weeks' time. We don't have that culture easily in our, we try to work until we fall over. Well, we're trying to get the ethic in the system, aren't we, of stay home when you feel a little bit unwell. Don't wait until you can't get out of bed before you stay home. Otherwise, you just give it to everybody. Recognizing that informal communication is energy enhancing. I remember my work with Department of Human Services. There was a certain point when a certain government came in and things got cut back and cut back and cut back, and they abolished tea rooms in the public service buildings. And I always thought there would be a PhD in examining and comparing smokers who would go and get their coffee and then go outside and smoke and drink coffee for about 10 minutes versus the non-smoking healthy people who rushed down to the kitchen, grabbed their cup of coffee, went back to their computer and kept working. Is the effect of smoking offset by 10 minutes in the sun chatting to your colleagues? It's really important to understand that informal communication is where a lot of mulling and digesting and energy is created, and where we get a sense of group identity. I didn't learn a great deal in my undergraduate psychology, but I did have a good, back in the 1960s in Adelaide, but I did have some very interesting social psychology, a couple of social psychology lecturers. And I learned that back in the period when they were mopping after the Second World War, the American army was really scratching their head and asking, why did the Wehrmacht, the German army, not collapse? Why did they work and fight right up to Hitler's bunker and the last, when it was hopeless? And they kept fighting to the very, very end. How did they do that? And they invited a series of social psychologists over who did a whole lot of interviews and came up with a very interesting finding. From the very beginning of their recruitment, the German army put people in groups and they held those groups steady, which is not what happened in the Allied armies. They moved people around all the time. I remember my dad, who was a Second World War veteran, talking about the constant changing of people as being so annoying. But the Wehrmacht kept them together, and they actually found that in the end, they were not fighting for the fatherland or for Hitler. They were fighting for each other. They were protecting their mates. They were working as a unit, just a small unit, a company or a platoon or whatever. And that this is what actually held them together. And I think this is so important to create group identities. How do we do that? Probably not in the work, but in reflection on the work, in talking about it, in having our social time together. Of course, that goes, doesn't it? Opportunities to reflect on the work. And it's very important for each level in the hierarchy to contain its anxiety. When the system gets overloaded, senior managers transmit their anxiety down, and more junior staff will transmit their anxiety up, and there'll be this contagion. And instead, we need this very deliberate communication of positive emotion as opposed to negative emotion. And we've got to be very deliberate to do that between managers and staff. And what are some resilience interventions? Anything that generates positive emotions is going to be helpful. Anything that preserves the context of the work in relation to the rest of life. And particularly these wonderful videos we've seen from overseas of whole communities going out and applauding the health workers and so on, making vivid and physical the sense of appreciation, and so that we understand what we're doing. Peer support. There's a certain level of support that I need from the people who do the work that I do, and I need that from them that I can't get from others. I need something else from others. Facilitated and structured opportunities to review and reflect, to retrieve what we normally have to put aside in order to do good work and be objective, and that is our experience of it. It doesn't matter how I feel about what I have to do this procedure. But if I'm human, I do have an experience of that. And if it's an intense experience that potentially challenges some of my deep-held ethical and other values, at some point I need to give that attention and process it. And so I think this would be, if I were to identify one thing that I think is absolutely crucial, it's this opportunity for reflection. I spend a fair chunk of my month doing this with various groups, and I can be very confident that this is energy creating. It helps people manage the negative emotions and helps them keep in touch with why they do this. And so this helps me preserve my sense of identity, and I can inhabit the work. I am doing the work. It's a really hard time, but it's not going to go on forever, and I'll be very proud I was part of this solution. Structures. We need a social structure. We need role, job, and accountability arrangements that reflect the current situation. We need a communication system that underpins all the things we've been describing. And so that means, I think one of the best things managers can do is to review your arrangements, handover. Maybe when the whole shift's together and both two shifts are together, maybe with a bit of organisation, you can give 10 minutes in maybe not every handover, but every now and again to say, look, we've got 10 minutes. How's everybody going? Let's just talk. Let's just talk about the work and let's see what comes up. Now, people need time to learn to use that, and we've got to make it safe, but that's incredibly valuable and gives a lot of material for then later problem solving. And boundaries and limits of all sorts. A few points on self-care as we wind up. The essence of stress is to diminish your sense of self and be less conscious of what is going to interfere with your performance. So therefore, you ignore all the stress signals. So number one, recognize your stress responses. Number two, commit to a self-care plan. Don't just say, I should go to bed earlier. Actually work out that you need to make a decision. I notice when I've counseled people who are in very chronic stressful situations, you can talk about this stuff, and when you see them next week, they haven't done it. But you've got to get to the point where they say, they make a decision, yes, I will do it. That decision is a very important thing. Protect energy sources, health, exercise, diet, rest, sleep, managing symptoms. And then develop routines that will hold those good qualities. And you'll have to force those routines. You'll have to force yourself to put your alarm on 5 minutes early. That shouldn't be too painful. Just go through your routine, and then for 5 minutes before you get in the car, you're going to walk around the garden, drinking your last cup of tea or coffee or something, or maybe just sniffing the eucalyptus, and then get in your car. That's going to be, after a while, if you do that, it'll be automatic. But you'll just have to commit yourself to build a routine. Manage mental states. We can manage them. There's a lot of information there about managing. Get joy any way you can with people you like, with activities you enjoy. It's often nice to have a little, I don't know, craft or a gardening project or knitting project or a carpentry project or a book you're reading or anything that you can just do a few minutes with every now and again, and you know it's heading slowly, inexorably to something that's going to be nice. Reflect, rest, learn to rest and unwind. It's a skill. Plan, prioritize, delegate, organize. And to do that, you've got to get yourself in the right frame of mind. And it's not comfortable, but we have to do that. And digest with those who understand you. And there are a couple of slides here to finish on simple things to promote resilience. Meaningful communication. Listen to people before you start responding. Think about what they're saying. Treat each other with respect and value. Focus on your full attention to this person in this moment. Preserve, adjust and create routines suited to the situation and preserve them. They will support you. They'll become part of your spacesuit. Limit emotional contagion. Think about what you're communicating to whom. We need to let our emotions out, but make sure it's in the safe place. Use people and resources, even if you've never done it before. Accept what can't be changed and adjust your goals. And preserve sleep and physical health. Preserve your mental emotional state. Pleasure and leisure are biological imperatives. Be flexible, establishing routine practices that will embody your values. Preserve that moral and value compass that's going to be bigger than the present moment. Value the resources that will recoup. Social activity, art, culture, creativity, travel, anything you can. I'll leave it there. There's a few other slides I've thrown in on the end of this that might give some resources, but I hope those thoughts are helpful in this difficult time, because burnout is when the energy runs out. The spacesuit is ruptured and we just don't feel we can ever do it again. I think we've got to intervene on that track long before we get anywhere near there. And that means doing something that we normally don't do. We start to actually take care of ourselves when we're starting to feel uncomfortable, not when we're at the end of our tether. And that's where we can protect ourselves. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that's helpful for the very important work you're all doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Another thought-provoking, informative, and very supportive webinar. We really appreciate and have so much gratitude for your time, expertise, and wisdom. And as you state, Rob, a contributor to resilience is support. So a reminder to everybody watching this or who watches it over time, if you need support, support is available from the Nursing Midwifery Health Program Victoria, and we're only a phone call away. 9415 7551, Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 5 p.m. Or the National Support Service for Nurses, Midwives and Students, Nurse and Midwife Support, 1-800-667-877, 24/7. So Rob, thanks once again for your wonderful and very supportive presentation. We really appreciate it. Bye.
Thanks very much, Mark. All the best to everyone.